Have you ever been told to just take a joke, to stop being so sensitive, to lighten up, when deep down you knew that what was happening wasn't funny at all? Have you ever smiled through the pain, laughed along with people who were laughing at you, and pretended that their words didn't cut straight through to your soul? Well, let me tell you something that I've learned the hard way, something that took me 32 years to fully understand. There's a massive difference between humor and humiliation, between playful teasing and psychological torture disguised as family tradition. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is what I'm about to share with you, because I spent most of my life being the punchline of every family joke, the target of every sarcastic comment, the person everyone felt entitled to mock, belittle, and tear down, all under the guise of harmless fun. And for the longest time, I believed them. I genuinely thought there was something wrong with me, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too incapable of understanding that this was just how families showed love. But here's the thing about being told you're overreacting your entire life. Eventually, you start to believe it. You start to question your own feelings, your own reality, your own worth. You begin to think that maybe you really are the problem, that maybe everyone else is right and you're just fundamentally broken in some way that makes you unable to appreciate the humor in being constantly degraded by the people who are supposed to love you most. I remember being 7 years old, standing in my grandmother's kitchen during Thanksgiving, my cheeks burning with shame as my uncle loudly announced to everyone that I had wet the bed the previous night during our sleepover at his house. The entire room erupted in laughter. My cousins pointed and giggled, my aunts exchanged knowing looks, and my parents, my own parents, just shook their heads with embarrassed smiles. When I started crying, when the tears just wouldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried to hold them back, my father pulled me aside and told me I needed to learn to take a joke, that family teases each other, that this was normal, that my sensitivity was going to make life very difficult for me if I didn't develop a thicker skin. I was 7 years old, and I was being taught that my humiliation was entertainment, that my pain was comedy, that my feelings didn't matter as much as everyone else's amusement. That moment planted a seed, a terrible seed that would grow and twist and poison my sense of self for decades to come. As I grew older, the jokes evolved, became more sophisticated, more cutting, more personal. They knew exactly where to strike to cause the most damage, and they did it with smiles on their faces, with laughter in their voices, with this absolute certainty that they were doing nothing wrong. My weight became a constant source of material. My failed relationships were dissected and mocked at every family gathering. My career choices were ridiculed. My fashion sense was a running gag. My interests were considered weird and worthy of mockery. Every single thing about me that made me who I am was fair game, was ammunition, was content for their entertainment. And every single time I expressed hurt, every time I asked them to stop, every time I tried to set even the smallest boundary, I was met with the same response. Learn to take a joke. Don't be so sensitive. We're just teasing. We do this because we love you. You need to lighten up. It's just family fun. The gaslighting was so consistent, so pervasive, so normalized that I genuinely started to believe that I was the problem. I started to think that there was something fundamentally wrong with my emotional wiring, that normal people could handle this kind of treatment without falling apart, that I was uniquely defective in my inability to laugh along with my own degradation. I spent years in therapy trying to fix myself, trying to become less sensitive, trying to build those walls they kept telling me I needed. My therapist would gently suggest that maybe the problem wasn't me, that maybe what my family was doing wasn't actually okay, but I couldn't hear it, I couldn't accept it, because accepting that would mean acknowledging that the people who raised me, who were supposed to protect me, had been actively harming me my entire life. That's a truth so painful, so devastating, that your brain will do everything in its power to reject it, to find alternative explanations, to blame yourself instead. It's easier to believe you're broken than to believe your family is cruel. It's easier to work on being less sensitive than to confront the people you love and tell them they're hurting you. It's easier to laugh along than to stand up and say enough. But there comes a point, and for everyone it's different, where something inside you just breaks, where you can't pretend anymore, where the pain becomes so overwhelming that survival means finally standing up for yourself, no matter the cost. For me, that breaking point came on what should have been the happiest day of my life, a day I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, a day that was supposed to be about love and new beginnings and hope for the future. My wedding day. I had met Marcus 3 years earlier, and he was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Kind, supportive, genuinely funny without being cruel, Someone who built me up instead of tearing me down, someone who made me feel valued and seen and loved for who I actually was. When I introduced him to my family, I was terrified, absolutely terrified of what they would say, how they would treat him, whether they would drive him away with their particular brand of humor. But Marcus, bless him, he tried so hard to fit in, to laugh along, to be part of the family dynamic. He didn't understand at first how deep the dysfunction ran, how normalized the cruelty had become. He thought it was just typical family banter, the kind of ribbing that happens in every family. It took him months to start seeing what I had been living with my entire life, to notice the pattern, to recognize that the jokes always had the same target, that the laughter was always at my expense, that there was nothing reciprocal or good-natured about it. He started pointing things out to me, gently, carefully, asking me if I was okay after family dinners, holding me while I cried and couldn't explain why, helping me see that what I had normalized was actually deeply abnormal. With his support, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the problem after all. Planning our wedding became this exercise in anxiety management because I absolutely knew, that my family would find ways to make it about them, to turn what should be my special day into another opportunity for their entertainment. I tried to set boundaries early on, I really did. I had conversations with my parents, with my siblings, with my aunts and uncles, explaining that this day was important to me, that I needed them to be respectful, that I was asking them, pleading with them, to just let me have this one day, without the jokes, without the mockery, without being made to feel small. They all promised. They looked me in the eyes and promised they would behave, that they understood how important this was, that of course they would be respectful. I wanted so desperately to believe them. I wanted to believe that they loved me enough to give me this one thing, this one day where I could feel valued and celebrated instead of ridiculed. I should have known better. The wedding ceremony itself went beautifully, and for those precious few hours, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things would be different, that maybe they had actually listened, that maybe we could have a normal, happy family celebration. Marcus and I exchanged vows that we had written ourselves, vows that were deeply personal and emotional, and I saw my mother crying, saw my father smiling, and I thought, this is it. This is the turning point. This is when everything changes. The reception started perfectly. The venue was beautiful. The food was delicious. The music was exactly what we wanted. I was floating on air, dancing with my new husband, feeling more joy than I had felt in years. And then came the speeches. My maid of honor, my best friend since college, gave a beautiful, heartfelt speech about our friendship, about watching me grow, about how happy she was that I had found Marcus. There were tears and laughter and love, and it was perfect. And then my brother stood up. I felt my stomach drop immediately, felt that old familiar dread settling into my bones, but I told myself to stay calm, to give him a chance, to believe that he would honor his promise. He started off okay, talking about growing up together, sharing some genuinely sweet childhood memories, and I started to relax, started to think that maybe I had been wrong to worry. And then he said it. He told a story in front of 200 guests, in front of Marcus's family who I barely knew, in front of my new in-laws who I desperately wanted to impress, about the time when I was 15 and had gotten my period unexpectedly during a family vacation. He went into excruciating detail about my panic, my embarrassment, the stained swimsuit, my tears, the way I had hidden in the bathroom for hours. He described how our father had to go buy me supplies, how our mother had lectured me about being prepared, how I had refused to come out of our hotel room for the rest of the day. He told this story with dramatic flair, with comedic timing, with voices and gestures, and people were laughing. They were actually laughing, as he recounted one of the most mortifying experiences of my adolescence. I sat there frozen, feeling the blood drain from my face, feeling Marcus's hand tighten around mine, feeling every eye in the room on me as my brother wrapped up his story with a comment about how I had always been overdramatic, how I couldn't take a joke even back then, how it was good that Marcus seemed to have a sense of humor because he was going to need it being married to someone as sensitive as me. The room was still chuckling as my brother raised his glass for a toast, completely oblivious to the fact that I was sitting there fighting back tears, that my hands were shaking, that I was on the verge of a complete breakdown on my own wedding day. Marcus squeezed my hand and whispered, asking if I was okay, and I couldn't even answer him because if I opened my mouth, I was going to scream, I was going to cry, I was going to completely fall apart in front of everyone. I excused myself to the bathroom, practically running from the reception hall, and my maid of honor followed me immediately. I locked myself in a stall and sobbed, great heaving sobs that I had been holding back for 32 years, while my best friend stood outside the door telling me how sorry she was, how unacceptable that was, how she couldn't believe he had done that. When I finally composed myself enough to look in the mirror, I saw my makeup running down my face, saw the pain in my eyes, saw the broken girl I had always been staring back at me, and something inside me just snapped. I realized in that moment that nothing was ever going to change, that no amount of pleading or boundary setting or hoping was going to make my family treat me with basic respect, that they had shown me exactly who they were thousands of times and I had kept refusing to believe it. I thought about my future, about bringing children into this dynamic, about watching my own kids be subjected to this same treatment, about perpetuating this cycle of normalized cruelty. And I absolutely knew, that I had to make a choice. I could keep playing my assigned role as the family punching bag, keep smiling through the pain, keep pretending that this was normal and acceptable, or I could finally stand up for myself, even if it meant losing everyone. My maid of honor helped me fix my makeup, and as we stood there in that bathroom, she asked me what I wanted to do, and I told her something that surprised even me. I wanted to go back out there and finish my speech. You see, I hadn't given my speech yet. The bride traditionally speaks after the groom, and Marcus had given a beautiful speech before my brothers, talking about our love story, about his hopes for our future, about how grateful he was to have found me. I was supposed to go next, to thank our guests, to express my joy and gratitude, to share my happiness. Instead, I walked back into that reception hall with a new purpose, with a clarity I had never felt before, with a determination that scared and exhilarated me in equal measure. I took the microphone with trembling hands, and the room quieted down, everyone expecting the traditional thank you speech, the emotional bride expressing her gratitude and love. I looked at my brother, sitting there with a satisfied smirk on his face, proud of his comedic contribution to my special day. I looked at my parents, who had laughed along with everyone else, who had once again chosen entertainment over my well-being. I looked at my extended family, all of them complicit in 3 decades of normalized cruelty. And then I looked at Marcus, my husband, my partner, my safe place, and I saw nothing but support and love in his eyes, and I knew I could do this. I started by thanking everyone for coming, for celebrating with us, for being part of our special day. And then I said something that made the room go very, very quiet. I said that I wanted to address my brother's speech, that I wanted to talk about the story he had just shared, that I wanted to take a moment to really examine what had just happened. I watched confusion spread across faces, watched my brother's smirk falter, watched my mother reach for my father's hand. I explained calmly and clearly that what my brother had just done was not funny, that sharing a deeply personal and embarrassing moment from my childhood without my consent was not a joke, that humiliating me in front of 200 people on my wedding day was not family tradition or harmless teasing, it was cruelty. I watched people shift uncomfortably in their seats, watched some of my relatives exchange glances, watched Marcus's family looking confused and concerned, and then I did something I had never done before. I told the truth. I told them about a lifetime of these jokes, about growing up believing there was something wrong with me, about the therapy, about the self-doubt, about the pain that I had carried for so long. I told them that I had specifically asked my family to respect me on this one day, that they had promised they would, and that they had broken that promise in the most spectacular way possible. I told them that I was done, that I was finished being the punchline, that I was no longer going to accept being treated as less than human for their entertainment. My voice was shaking but steady. My words were measured but firm, and with each sentence, I felt something lifting off my shoulders, some tremendous weight that I had been carrying my entire life. I watched my brother's face go red, watched my mother start to cry, watched my father stand up as if to interrupt me, but I kept going. I told them that there would be consequences this time, that things were going to change, that I was drawing a line in the sand and they could either respect it or they could lose me. And then I thanked everyone else for coming, told them I hoped they enjoyed the rest of the evening, and handed the microphone back to the DJ with hands that were no longer trembling but steady, strong, certain. The rest of the reception was awkward to say the least, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. I really didn't, because for the first time in my life I had stood up for myself. I had spoken my truth. I had refused to pretend that everything was okay when it very clearly wasn't. Some guests left early, uncomfortable with the tension that now hung over the celebration. Others came up to me privately, some to offer support, others to tell me I had overreacted, that I had ruined my own wedding, that I should have just let it go. Marcus's family was incredibly supportive. His mother actually hugged me and told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself, that she had been appalled by my brother's speech, that she couldn't believe anyone would think that was appropriate. My own family, however, was a different story entirely. My brother was furious, absolutely livid that I had called him out publicly, that I had embarrassed him in front of everyone. My parents were hurt and defensive, insisting that they had no idea I felt this way, that we were just a joking family, that I was being overdramatic and ruining what should have been a happy occasion. My aunts and uncles avoided me for the rest of the night, and several of my cousins left without saying goodbye. But here's the thing. Here's what I realized as I watched my family's reactions, as I saw them making themselves the victims of the situation, their discomfort, their embarrassment, their hurt feelings at being called out for their behavior. That was nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the pain they had been inflicting on me for 32 years. They had had countless opportunities to treat me with kindness and respect, and they had chosen cruelty every single time. They had had the chance to honor one simple request on my wedding day, and they had chosen to break their promise. They had made their choices, and now they were experiencing the consequences, and I refused to feel guilty about that. Marcus and I left our own reception early, went up to our honeymoon suite, and just held each other. He told me he loved me, that he was proud of me, that he had my back no matter what happened next. And I cried. But these weren't tears of shame or embarrassment or pain like I had cried so many times before. These were tears of relief, of release, of finally choosing myself after a lifetime of accepting less than I deserved. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life, but also some of the most liberating, because I stuck to my boundaries. I held firm to my decision, and I refused to back down no matter how much pressure my family applied. The texts started the morning after the wedding, dozens of them from my parents, my siblings, my extended family, all with the same message. I had overreacted, I had been too harsh, I needed to apologize, I needed to make things right. I needed to understand that they were just joking, that they loved me, that family is supposed to forgive. My mother called crying, telling me I had humiliated her, that her friends were asking questions, that I had made the family look dysfunctional in front of everyone. My father sent me long emails about family loyalty, about respecting your elders, about how I was tearing the family apart over nothing. My brother sent me one text that just said, "Wow, you really can't take a joke, can you?" As if nothing had changed, as if he still didn't understand the magnitude of what he had done. But I didn't respond to any of them, not right away, because Marcus and I were on our honeymoon, and I was determined to enjoy it, to focus on my marriage, on my new life, on building something healthy and positive instead of dwelling on the toxicity I was leaving behind. We spent 2 weeks in Italy, and it was magical. It was everything a honeymoon should be, and I didn't let my family's drama intrude on that time. But I thought about it constantly. I processed it. I talked it through with Marcus, and I made some very important decisions about what my boundaries would be going forward. When we got back home, I sent one carefully crafted message to my entire family, a group text that I spent hours writing and rewriting, making sure every word said exactly what I needed it to say. I told them that I loved them, but that I would no longer tolerate being disrespected. I outlined my boundaries clearly. No more jokes at my expense, no more sharing embarrassing stories without my consent, no more dismissing my feelings when I express hurt, and genuine apologies for past behavior, not justifications or excuses or minimizing, but real acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. I told them that these boundaries were non-negotiable, that I was happy to have a relationship with them if they could respect these terms, but that if they couldn't or wouldn't, then I would be limiting contact or cutting it off entirely. I explained that this wasn't punishment or revenge or me being dramatic. This was self-preservation. This was me finally choosing my own mental health and well-being over their comfort. The responses I got were all over the place and very telling about who these people really were when forced to confront their own behavior, instead of just deflecting onto my supposed sensitivity. Some family members were immediately defensive, firing back messages about how I was being ridiculous, how I was trying to control them, how they had a right to make jokes, how I was destroying the family over nothing. These were the people who had benefited most from the dynamic, who had enjoyed having a designated target, who saw my boundaries as a personal attack rather than a reasonable request for basic respect. My brother sent a particularly nasty message calling me various names and saying that I had always been the problem in the family, that everyone walked on eggshells around me, that I was never satisfied no matter what anyone did. The irony of him claiming people walked on eggshells around me when I had spent my entire life carefully managing my reactions to avoid being called too sensitive was almost funny, almost. if it wasn't so painfully revealing about how little self-awareness he had. My parents' response was more subtle but equally problematic. They sent me a message saying they understood I was upset, that they were sorry I felt hurt, but that I needed to understand that this was just how our family was, that they couldn't change who they were, that I was asking them to fundamentally alter their personalities and their relationships with each other. This non-apology apology, this refusal to take actual responsibility while pretending to be conciliatory, was perhaps even more frustrating than my brother's outright hostility, because at least he was being honest about his unwillingness to change. But there were surprises too, responses I hadn't expected, family members I hadn't thought would understand who actually reached out with genuine support. My cousin Rachel, who I had always assumed was just as complicit as everyone else, sent me a private message saying that she had always felt uncomfortable with how I was treated, that she was sorry she had never said anything, that she understood why I was setting boundaries, and she supported me completely. She told me that she had her own issues with the family dynamic, that she had been working on her own boundaries for years, and that seeing me stand up for myself had inspired her to be more vocal about her own needs. My Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, called me and apologized, for years of participating in the mockery, for laughing along, for never standing up for me when she knew things had gone too far. She told me she had done a lot of thinking since the wedding, that my speech had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about how the family functioned, and that she wanted to do better. These unexpected allies meant everything to me. They really did, because they showed me that not everyone was lost, that some people were capable of growth and change and genuine remorse. But the majority of my family circled the wagons. They really did. They chose to protect the dysfunction rather than address it, chose to make me the villain rather than examine their own behavior. Family gatherings were planned without me. Group chats continued without my number. Photos were posted on social media of everyone together, with conspicuous comments about how nice it was when everyone could just relax and have fun. The message was clear. I was the problem. I was the one who couldn't get along. I was the one missing out. And if I would just come back and accept my role, everything could go back to normal. But I didn't go back. I didn't cave. I didn't apologize for setting boundaries, even when my mother showed up at my house crying, even when my father sent me a letter saying I was breaking his heart, even when relatives I barely knew sent me Facebook messages about the importance of family forgiveness. I held firm because I absolutely knew in my bones, that going back without real change would mean accepting that pattern forever, would mean teaching them that I would always eventually cave, that my boundaries meant nothing, that they could keep treating me however they wanted as long as they applied enough pressure afterward. Marcus was my rock through all of this. He really was. He reminded me every single day that I was doing the right thing, that I deserved respect, that real family doesn't require you to accept abuse in the name of tradition. His family welcomed me with open arms, showed me what healthy family dynamics looked like, demonstrated that it was possible to tease and joke with each other without cruelty, that it was possible to have fun together without someone having to be the target. I spent that first Thanksgiving with Marcus's family, and it was revelation after revelation. Watching them interact with genuine affection, seeing how they handled disagreements with respect and communication, experiencing what it felt like to be part of a family that built each other up instead of tearing each other down. I didn't realize I was crying until Marcus's mother handed me a tissue and squeezed my hand. Didn't realize how starved I had been for this kind of warmth and acceptance until I was surrounded by it. Christmas came and went, and I received exactly one text from my family, a group message that said, "Merry Christmas to those who want to be part of this family," which was clearly directed at me, clearly designed to make me feel guilty for not caving to their demands. I didn't respond. I just spent the holiday with Marcus and his family and some friends, and it was peaceful. It was joyful. It was everything the holidays should be. And I didn't miss the anxiety and tension and walking on eggshells that had characterized every family gathering of my childhood. Months passed, and the silence from most of my family continued, but I was okay. I really was. Because I was building a life that didn't revolve around managing other people's egos and protecting myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. I was sleeping better. My anxiety had decreased significantly. I was able to focus on my career and my marriage and my friendships without the constant drain of family drama. My therapist told me she had never seen me so settled, so grounded, so sure of myself, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because it did. It hurt terribly to realize that my family valued their right to mock me more than they valued having a relationship with me. It hurt to see photos of family events I wasn't invited to know that they were all together talking about what a drama queen I was, to understand that they had chosen each other and the dysfunction over me. But that hurt was clean, if that makes sense. It was honest hurt about the real situation, not the confused, gaslighted hurt I had carried for decades where I couldn't tell if I was being unreasonable or if they were being cruel. This hurt came with clarity, with understanding, with the knowledge that I had done everything I could to create a healthy relationship, and they had refused. That made it bearable. That made it something I could process and grieve and eventually move past. And then, about 6 months after the wedding, something unexpected happened. My grandmother, my father's mother, who had been present for countless incidents of family mockery over the years, who had never intervened, never said anything, called me. She was 93 years old, her health was declining, and she asked me to come visit her. I almost said no, I really did, because I was afraid it was a setup, afraid my family would be there, afraid she would lecture me about family loyalty and forgiveness. But something in her voice made me agree, and I went to her house the next day. Mark is coming with me for support. What she told me in that conversation changed everything, shifted my understanding of my family in ways I hadn't anticipated. She told me that she had watched what happened at my wedding, that she had been thinking about it every day since, and that she owed me an apology. She said that the pattern of treatment I had experienced, it wasn't random. It wasn't just the family's sense of humor, it was something much more deliberate and much more toxic. Have you ever experienced something similar with your family, where standing up for yourself felt impossible? Comment below and let me know, because what my grandmother told me next explained so much. She explained that when I was born, I was the first grandchild, the first baby in the family in over a decade, and everyone was excited, everyone doted on me, everyone fought over who got to hold me and spend time with me. My parents, particularly my mother, received so much attention and praise for having such a beautiful, sweet baby, and according to my grandmother, my mother loved that attention, craved it, built her identity around being the mother of this perfect child. But then I grew up, as children do, and I wasn't a cute baby anymore. I was a person with my own thoughts and feelings and personality, and apparently I was sensitive even as a toddler. I cried easily. I felt things deeply. I needed more emotional support than other kids. My grandmother said that my mother started to see this sensitivity as a flaw, as something embarrassing, as a reflection of her parenting, and instead of nurturing it or accepting it as part of who I was, she started to mock it, started to point it out, started to make it the butt of jokes. And my father, who worshipped my mother, who would do anything to make her happy, joined in, supported her, reinforced this narrative that I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. My brother, who came along 2 years after me, learned from watching them that making fun of me was how you got approval in this family, that putting me down was rewarded with laughter and attention. And it spread from there, became the family culture, became so normalized that nobody even questioned it anymore. My grandmother said she had watched this pattern develop, had seen how it affected me, had wanted to say something so many times but had been too afraid of causing family conflict, of being accused of taking sides, of disrupting the family peace. She said that my speech at my wedding, my willingness to stand up for myself publicly, had shamed her, had made her realize that her silence had been complicity, that by saying nothing she had enabled decades of mistreatment. She was crying as she told me this. This 93-year-old woman who had always seemed so strong and unshakable, and she begged me to forgive her, not them, but her, for not protecting me when I was a child who couldn't protect myself. I sat there processing this information, trying to reconcile everything I thought I knew about my childhood with this new understanding, and I felt so many emotions all at once. Vindication that I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive, rage at my parents for deliberately cultivating this dynamic, grief for the childhood I should have had, and oddly, compassion for my grandmother, who had carried this guilt for so long. I told my grandmother that I forgave her, and I meant it, because she had done what none of my other family members had been willing to do. She had taken responsibility, she had acknowledged the harm, she had seen me as a person worthy of respect and dignity. She asked me if I would consider reconciling with my parents and brother, and I told her the truth. I would if they were willing to do the real work, if they could acknowledge what they had done, if they could genuinely apologize and commit to change. But I also told her that I wasn't holding my breath, that I had accepted that they might never be capable of that level of self-reflection, and that I was okay with that I had built a good life without them and I would continue to do so whether they came around or not. My grandmother nodded, said she understood, and then she asked me one more thing. She asked if I would be willing to come to a family dinner at her house in a month, that she wanted to talk to everyone, that she wanted to try to facilitate a real conversation about what had happened, I was hesitant, so hesitant, because I didn't want to subject myself to more attacks, more gaslighting, more of the same patterns. But my grandmother promised me that she would control the conversation, that she would not allow anyone to attack me or dismiss me, that this would be different. I looked at Marcus, who squeezed my hand and told me it was my choice, that he would support whatever I decided. And I said yes, I would come, but with clear conditions. If anyone started mocking me or dismissing my feelings, I would leave immediately, and that would be the end of any attempt at reconciliation. My grandmother agreed, and I left her house feeling a strange mixture of hope and dread, hope that maybe things could actually change, dread that I was setting myself up for more disappointment and pain. The next month was filled with anxiety, second-guessing, and preparation. I worked with my therapist on strategies for staying grounded, for maintaining my boundaries, for not falling back into old patterns of people-pleasing and apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Marcus and I role-played different scenarios, practiced responses to potential attacks or manipulations, planned our exit strategy if things went badly. I wrote down my boundaries and what I needed from my family, read them over and over until they were burned into my memory, until I could say them even if my voice was shaking, even if I was scared, even if everyone was staring at me with judgment and disappointment. The night of the dinner arrived, and I almost didn't go. I really almost called my grandmother and backed out, because the fear was overwhelming, the old patterns so deeply ingrained that part of me still believed I was the problem, still believed I should just apologize and make peace and accept things as they were. But Marcus reminded me that I had nothing to apologize for, that I deserved respect, that this was their chance to show me who they really were. And we drove to my grandmother's house with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Everyone was there when we arrived. My parents, my brother and his wife, several aunts and uncles, my cousin Rachel, who had been supportive, even some family members I hadn't expected. The atmosphere was tense, awkward, with people avoiding eye contact and making stilted small talk. My grandmother welcomed us warmly, hugged me tight, whispered that she was proud of me for coming. We all sat down in her living room, the same room where I had spent countless childhood gatherings being mocked and dismissed, and my grandmother, frail but fierce, stood up and addressed everyone. She told them that we were here to talk about what had happened at my wedding, about the patterns in our family, about the treatment I had received my entire life. She told them that she would not tolerate anyone dismissing or minimizing or attacking me, that if they couldn't listen with open hearts and minds, they could leave now. Nobody left, but I saw several uncomfortable glances, several crossed arms, several faces that clearly communicated this was going to be a waste of time. My grandmother asked me to speak first, to explain how I felt, what I needed, what boundaries I was setting. I took a deep breath, felt Marcus's hand in mine, and I started talking. I told them everything, not angrily, not accusingly, just honestly, laying out decades of pain, explaining how their treatment had affected me, describing the therapy, the self-doubt, the damage that had been done. I watched their faces as I spoke, saw my mother crying, saw my father staring at the floor, saw my brother looking defiant and angry, saw some relatives looking genuinely surprised, as if they had never considered that their jokes might actually hurt me. When I finished, there was silence, heavy and uncomfortable, and I waited to see who would speak first, who would break the quiet with either validation or defensiveness, who would show me whether this gathering would be different or just more of the same. My mother spoke first, and what she said surprised me, genuinely surprised me, because while it wasn't perfect, while it wasn't everything I needed, it was more than I had expected. She said that listening to me talk, hearing the pain in my voice made her realize that she had been wrong, that she had convinced herself that the teasing was harmless when clearly it hadn't been. She said that she didn't know how to explain or excuse her behavior, that maybe my grandmother was right, and it had started as her own insecurity about my sensitivity being a reflection on her parenting, and instead of accepting me as I was, she had tried to change me, to toughen me up, to make me into someone who wouldn't feel so deeply. She said she was sorry, that she had failed me as a mother, that she should have protected me instead of making me a target. My father spoke next, and he was crying, actually crying, which I had maybe seen twice in my entire life. He said that he had always just followed my mother's lead, that he knew that wasn't an excuse, that he should have been his own person, should have stood up for me, should have seen what was happening. He said that he had told himself it was just family fun, that everyone did it, that I needed to learn to handle it, but that hearing me tonight made him realize he had been protecting himself from guilt rather than actually believing those justifications. My brother, however, was a different story. He sat there with his arms crossed, looking angry and defensive, And when he finally spoke, it was to say that he still thought I was overreacting, that families joke with each other, that I was trying to make everyone walk on eggshells, that I was being manipulative by framing normal family interactions as abuse. His wife put her hand on his arm as if to quiet him, but he kept going, said that the real problem was that I couldn't handle criticism, couldn't handle not being the center of attention, couldn't handle people seeing my flaws. And I watched my grandmother do something I had never seen her do before. She told my brother to be quiet, told him that he was proving my point, told him that if he couldn't participate in this conversation with respect and honesty, he needed to leave her house. My brother looked shocked, looked around for support, but my parents didn't back him up this time, didn't rush to defend him, and he stood up and left, his wife following after him with an apologetic look toward me. And something shifted in that moment. Something fundamental, because my parents had chosen to stay, had chosen the conversation over automatically supporting my brother. And that felt significant. Felt like maybe they were actually hearing me this time. The conversation continued for hours, with different family members sharing their perspectives, some apologizing, some admitting they had never thought about how their behavior affected me, some saying they had always felt uncomfortable, but didn't know how to intervene. My Aunt Linda talked about her own experiences of feeling marginalized in the family. My cousin Rachel shared that she had been in therapy dealing with family dysfunction, and slowly, painfully, a more honest picture of our family emerged, one that acknowledged the toxicity instead of just pretending everything was fine. My parents asked me what I needed from them going forward, asked how they could repair the relationship, and I told them the same things I had outlined in my boundaries. Genuine respect, no more jokes at my expense, acknowledgement when they slip up instead of defensiveness, and time, because trust wasn't going to be rebuilt overnight. They agreed, said they would do the work, said they wanted to be part of my life, part of any future grandchildren's lives. And they understood that was going to require real change on their part. I left that dinner feeling cautiously hopeful but also realistic, knowing that words are easy and actions are what matter, knowing that people can mean well but still fall back into old patterns, knowing that I needed to see consistent change over time before I could fully let my guard down. And over the next year, something remarkable happened, something I honestly didn't think was possible. My parents actually followed through. They actually did the work. They actually changed their behavior. It wasn't perfect. There were slip-ups, moments when old patterns started to emerge, but the difference was that when I pointed them out, they listened, they apologized, they corrected course instead of getting defensive. My mother started therapy to work on her own issues. My father made a genuine effort to have one-on-one conversations with me where he asked about my life and actually listened to the answers. They read books about emotional abuse and family dynamics. They watched their language around me. They defended me when other family members made inappropriate comments. Slowly, carefully, we built a new relationship, one based on mutual respect instead of the old toxic patterns. And while it wasn't the close, warm family relationship I had dreamed of as a child, it was honest, it was real, and it was healthier than anything we had had before. My brother never apologized, never acknowledged any wrongdoing, and we remained estranged, which was sad but also necessary, because I couldn't have a relationship with someone who refused to see me as a full person deserving of respect. Some extended family members also never came around, chose to maintain their version of events where I was the dramatic troublemaker who ruined family harmony, and I had to accept that too. Had to let go of the fantasy that everyone would eventually understand and apologize. But here's what I learned through all of this. Here's what I want you to understand if you're in a similar situation, dealing with family members who disguise cruelty as humor, who gaslight you into thinking you're too sensitive, who make you feel like you're the problem. You're not the problem, you're really not, and you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect, especially by the people who claim to love you most. Setting boundaries doesn't make you difficult or dramatic or a bad family member. It makes you someone with self-respect, someone who understands their worth, someone who refuses to accept abuse in the name of tradition or family loyalty. And yes, there will be consequences. There will be people who don't understand. There will be relationships that end or change dramatically, and that's painful. It's incredibly painful. But the alternative is continuing to sacrifice your mental health and well-being to maintain relationships that are fundamentally harmful to you. I won't lie and say it's easy, because it's not. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, standing up to my family, setting those boundaries, being willing to walk away if necessary. But it was also the most important thing I've ever done for myself, the turning point where I stopped being a victim of my circumstances and started being an active participant in creating the life I wanted. The relief of no longer carrying that constant anxiety, that constant anticipation of being mocked, that constant self-doubt about whether I was overreacting. It's indescribable. It's like being able to breathe fully for the first time in your life. And building relationships with Marcus's family, with friends who treat me with genuine care and respect, with the family members who were willing to grow and change. That showed me what I had been missing, what I deserved all along. I think about the little girl I was, crying in my grandmother's kitchen at 7 years old, being told to take a joke, being taught that her feelings didn't matter, and I wish I could go back and tell her that she wasn't wrong, that her feelings were valid, that she deserved so much better. I think about all the years I spent in therapy trying to fix something that wasn't broken, trying to become less sensitive instead of demanding that people be less cruel, and I grieve for that wasted time, that wasted energy, that wasted potential for genuine happiness. But I also feel grateful, genuinely grateful, for where I am now, for the strength I discovered in myself, for the life I've built, for the relationships that survived because they were real and the ones that ended because they were toxic. I feel grateful for Marcus, who loved me enough to help me see the truth, who supported me through the hardest parts, who never once suggested I should just make peace and accept things as they were. I feel grateful for my grandmother, who finally spoke up even though it was difficult, who used her influence to create space for real conversation, who showed me that it's never too late to do the right thing. So if you're reading this, if you're listening to this story and seeing yourself in it, seeing your own family dynamics reflected in my experience, I want you to know that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and you're not too sensitive. You're allowed to have boundaries, you're allowed to demand respect, you're allowed to walk away from people who hurt you even if they're family, even if everyone tells you that family is forever and you should just forgive and forget. You're allowed to choose your own mental health over other people's comfort. You're allowed to refuse to be the designated target. You're allowed to say enough is enough and mean it. It won't be easy. The people who benefit from your compliance will fight back. They'll try to guilt you and shame you and convince you that you're the problem. But if you stay strong, if you hold your boundaries, if you refuse to back down, you'll create space for real change, either in your relationships or in your life as you build new ones. And I want to be clear about something. This isn't about being vindictive or punishing people or refusing to forgive. It's about protecting yourself. It's about requiring basic human decency from the people in your life. It's about understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting ongoing mistreatment, that you can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life if they're not willing to change. The consequences I showed my family weren't revenge. They were natural outcomes of their choices. They were me finally refusing to absorb the cost of their dysfunction. They were me putting the responsibility for their behavior back on them where it belonged. And some of them rose to the occasion, did the work, changed their behavior, and we built new, healthier relationships. Others didn't, refused to see their part in it, blamed me for everything, and we went our separate ways. Both outcomes taught me important things about who people are and what they value, about who is capable of growth and who is committed to staying exactly as they are regardless of who it hurts. Now I want to ask you something, and I really want you to take a moment to think about this. Have you been told to just take a joke when something genuinely hurt you? Have you been made to feel like your sensitivity is a flaw rather than a feature? Have you been the designated target in your family, your friend group, your workplace, any relationship in your life? If the answer is yes, I want you to comment below and share your experience, because these stories matter. These experiences matter, and the more we talk about this pattern of normalized cruelty, the more we can help each other see that it's not okay, that we deserve better, that we can demand better. Understanding this content, really understanding that you're not the problem and that you deserve respect, can change your life the way it changed mine. It can free you from years of unnecessary guilt and self-doubt, can help you see your relationships more clearly, can give you permission to set boundaries and expect them to be honored. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart or made you think about your own experiences or helped you feel less alone, please leave a like on this video. It really helps me know that these stories are connecting with people, that sharing my truth is making a difference. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more real, honest, emotional experiences from people who have survived difficult situations and come out stronger, please subscribe to Living Through It and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. This channel is all about authentic stories, real experiences, the kind of messy, complicated, beautiful truth that we don't always talk about but desperately need to hear. We're building a community here of people who understand that life isn't always easy, that families aren't always healthy, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even when it costs you everything. So please join us, be part of this community, share your stories, support each other, and let's create a space where people can be honest about their struggles without judgment, without being told they're too sensitive or too dramatic or too much. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough to hear me out. Remember that you deserve kindness. You deserve respect. You deserve relationships that build you up instead of tearing you down. And you have every right to demand those things from the people in your life. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves, and know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone in it. I'll see you in the next video.